Namo Phat. Good morning. Thank you for joining me for a daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This beautiful sound calls us back to our true home. The first mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion and learn ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I'm determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to condone any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. For our Dharma readings, we've been reading a book by the nuns of Amaravati called The Body, Dhamma, Reflections on Aging, Sickness, and Death. Right now we're in a Dhamma talk by Ajahn Metta called Walking the Path with Courage. I do not want to go too much into the 5 precepts and how we should practice them, but any path you follow will bring up questions like, what are my needs? What are the values I want to develop in this life? What are the values of this path that I've chosen to walk? Can I live these values as much as possible and as much as I would like to? When we ask these questions, this is where courage comes in, because we do need the courage to change. We do need the courage to look into our patterns, to ask, what parts of my life need more attention, more mindfulness, more kindness, or more compassion? I think the very first step is something like an internal checkup, and I remember having done that myself. What do I see in the way I'm living that needs change? One important tool to use here is honesty. Can we be honest in relating to what we find when we do this? It is up to each of us to make these choices about where and how we step out of our usual unreflected patterns of living. We usually become interested in a spiritual path because we see a need and want to change our lives. We look for ways to bring more depth, more meaning into it, more of the values which are important to us. We look for ways of manifesting them, bringing them to life, and living them in our daily experiences. When you make these internal evaluations, you might find things that you really want to change. There are different reasons for this. It might be because they've become meaningless and no longer make much sense in your life. With these internal checkups, you might also find things that are necessary for walking this path. Most likely, you will encounter the qualities of kindness, empathy, compassion, or others that will need to be developed further. I'd like to share a bit of my own experience with this. When I was in Thailand many years ago, I came in contact with the Theravada tradition. I'd gone to a monastery to do a retreat there, and this was when I first came into direct contact with the teachings of the Buddha. Hearing the Four Noble Truths gave me an incredible sense of relief. I had finally found what I had been looking for all my life, or let's say, for many years of my life. It gave me the answers to many questions that had been there for a long time. It also brought up the question of how I had been living my life. What were my values? What place did they have in my everyday life? And how did they manifest? What I found then was that I had spent a lot of time on things and activities to distract myself from what was not so pleasant to feel, from dissatisfaction and suffering. I knew how to distract myself from those areas where I wasn't very honest with myself or with others. I started to notice how I did things, how I related in habitual ways without questioning them anymore. Did I really want to relate to this person or to this situation in exactly this way? I noticed the lack of evaluation in regard to this, How much attention did I give to relating to others? Did I really want to be aware of the needs of others and of my own? My experience of being in a monastery in Thailand was pulling me out of my habitual way of living. I found myself in a completely different world. At times, I just felt bored. There was suddenly so much time for practice and looking inside, for examining what was happening internally. I found myself in places where I experienced boredom because I did not want to look deeper. My habitual pattern of reaction was, what else could I do right now? Looking for any kind of distraction from this experience. But usually, there was just nothing much to do with this with. One of the few options was relating to others, making contact with them and distracting each other. But you can't do that for very long, at least not when you are to some degree honest with yourself. Then you notice, I am doing this right now because I don't want to face the unpleasantness of this experience. That same moment of honesty, that very experience, brings up the quality of courage. It takes courage to turn away from distraction, to enter that place which is not easeful, to turn towards that which is painful, to acknowledge what needs to stop, to consider a change. It is not an easy thing to do. It involves reflecting on what is really needed here and now. How do we relate to unpleasantness? Of course, I do not mean to say that following a spiritual path, practicing, brings with it only difficult experiences. Of course it doesn't. Or why would we want to do it in the first place? It does, however, require a lot of courage and determination to maintain our practice. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for joining me this morning.